The rain fell like tears from heaven on the day they buried Michael Caruso. St. Anthony's Cathedral was packed with mourners dressed in black, their faces a mixture of grief and something else. Something Naomi recognized as fear. She stood at the front of the church, her dark skin a stark contrast against the white lace of her mourning veil, staring at the mahogany casket that held what remained of the man she had married 3 years ago. Michael Caruso had been many things. A husband, though not always a good one, a son of one of New York's oldest Italian families, and according to the whispers that followed Naomi everywhere she went, a man who had gotten himself killed doing something stupid, something that involved money he should not have borrowed, and people he should not have crossed. Naomi was 28 years old and already a widow. She had no family of her own in New York, her parents having passed years before, and Michael's family had never fully accepted the black woman their son had married against their wishes. She stood alone at the front of the church, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her back, judging, assessing, calculating. The priest droned on in Latin, words that meant nothing to Naomi, who had been raised Baptist in Atlanta before moving north for college. She had met Michael at Columbia, where he had been charming and attentive, pursuing her with the single-minded determination that she would later learn was a family trait. He had swept her off her feet with expensive dinners and weekend trips, with promises of a life filled with excitement and luxury. The reality had been different. Michael worked for his family's import-export business, a legitimate operation that Naomi had slowly come to understand served as a front for less legal activities. He had been reckless with money, careless with his commitments, and increasingly distant in their marriage. In the weeks before his death, he had been nervous, jumpy, making phone calls in hushed tones and leaving the house at odd hours. Then 4 days ago, the police had come to her door. Michael had been found in an alley in Red Hook, shot 3 times in the chest. The detective who delivered the news had given her a look that said he knew exactly what kind of man her husband had been, and that he was not surprised by how Michael's life had ended. Now Naomi stood in this cathedral that smelled of incense and lilies, listening to prayers for a man's soul and wondering what would happen to her next. Michael had left debts. She knew that much. Debts to the wrong people. And she had no idea if those debts would transfer to her now that he was gone. The service concluded, and the pallbearers stepped forward to carry the casket. That was when Naomi saw him for the first time. Actually saw him. Not just caught glimpses of him at family dinners where he had been a distant, intimidating presence at the far end of the table. Alessandro Caruso, Michael's older brother by 7 years, moved with a predator's grace to take his position at the front of the casket. He was taller than Michael had been, broader in the shoulders, with the kind of presence that made people step aside without him having to ask. His suit was impeccably tailored, black on black, and his dark hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Where Michael had been handsome in a boyish way, Alessandro was beautiful in a dangerous way, all sharp angles and hard lines. But it was his eyes that caught Naomi's attention. Gray-blue, the color of storm clouds. They swept across the congregation with cold assessment before landing on her. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the space between them. Alessandro's expression was unreadable, but something in his gaze made Naomi's breath catch in her throat. It was not grief she saw there. It was something else entirely, something possessive and calculating that made her skin prickle, with awareness. Then the moment passed. Alessandro lifted his end of the casket with 5 other men, and they began the slow procession out of the cathedral. Naomi followed, walking alone behind the casket as protocol demanded, feeling Alessandro's presence ahead of her like a physical force. The burial was at Calvary Cemetery in Queens, where generations of Carusos had been laid to rest. The rain continued to fall, turning the grass to mud and making the assembled mourners huddle under black umbrellas. Naomi stood at the graveside without an umbrella, letting the rain soak through her dress, feeling as empty as the sky. As the priest said the final prayers, Naomi became aware of movement in her peripheral vision. Alessandro had separated from the other pallbearers and was making his way around the grave toward her. Several family members watched with expressions that ranged from shock to satisfaction, but no one moved to stop him. Alessandro stopped beside Naomi, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated. Without a word, he opened his large black umbrella and held it over both of them, sheltering her from the rain. The gesture was protective, intimate in a way that felt inappropriate given the circumstances, but Naomi found herself grateful for it nonetheless. From this distance, she could see the details of his face, the slight crook in his nose from an old break, the faint scar that ran through his left eyebrow, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. He was 35 years old, according to what Michael had told her, and had taken over running the family's business interests when their father had died 5 years ago. Michael had always spoken of his brother with a mixture of respect and resentment, the way younger sons throughout history had spoken of the heirs who overshadowed them. The coffin was lowered into the ground. People began to file away, returning to their cars to head to the Caruso family home for the reception. But Alessandro did not move, and something made Naomi stay as well, standing in the rain beside a man she barely knew, watching her husband's coffin disappear into the earth. When the last of the mourners had departed, leaving only the cemetery workers waiting at a respectful distance, Alessandro finally spoke. "You should not be alone today." His voice was deeper than Michael's had been, with a faint rasp that suggested late nights and whiskey. Despite their shared heritage, Alessandro's Italian accent was more pronounced, suggesting closer ties to the old country. "I am alone," Naomi replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Michael's family never accepted me. I have no one else here." "That is not entirely true." Alessandro turned to face her fully, and Naomi had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. She was 5'7", but he still towered over her. "You have me." The statement was simple, but the weight behind it was not. Naomi stared at Alessandro, trying to understand what he meant, what he was offering or claiming. "I do not understand," she said carefully. Alessandro's jaw tightened. "My brother made many mistakes in his life. Marrying you was not one of them. Treating you poorly, neglecting you, leaving you vulnerable. Those were mistakes. Fatal ones, as it turns out." "What do you mean?" Alessandro glanced toward the cemetery workers, then took Naomi's elbow and guided her away from the grave, toward a stone mausoleum that provided shelter from the rain. Once they were out of earshot of anyone else, he turned to face her again. Michael owed money to the Volkov family. $200,000 borrowed to cover gambling debts and bad business decisions. He was supposed to pay it back 3 weeks ago. Naomi felt her stomach drop. "I did not know." "Of course you did not." Michael was skilled at hiding his failures. Alessandro's expression was grim. "The Volkovs are not patient men. When Michael could not pay, they killed him as a message to others who might consider defaulting on debts." "Oh God." Naomi's hand went to her mouth. "Does that mean, are they going to come after me for the money?" "That depends." Alessandro studied her face with those unsettling eyes. "On whether you are still considered a Caruso. I do not understand what you are asking me. Do you plan to remain in New York? Or will you return to Atlanta? Do you intend to keep Michael's name? Or will you revert to your maiden name? Will you be at his family's table for holidays and important events? Or will you disappear from our lives completely?" Naomi struggled to process what he was saying. Why would any of that matter? Because if you remain a Caruso, then you are family, and family debts are family responsibilities. The Volkovs will not touch you. I will make certain of that. And if I do not remain a Caruso, then you are simply Michael's widow, a civilian with no protection, no standing, no claim to our name or our resources. And the Volkovs might decide that making you pay Michael's debt would send an equally effective message. The implication hit Naomi like a physical blow. "You are saying I have to stay in the family to stay safe." "I am saying that protection has a price," Alessandro said calmly, "and that price is loyalty. You can walk away, Naomi. Go back to Atlanta, start a new life, put all of this behind you. But if you do, you will be on your own, and the Volkovs have long memories and even longer reach. That is not a choice at all." "Of course it is, just not a pleasant one." Alessandro's expression softened slightly. "Look, I know you and Michael were not happy together. I know he neglected you, perhaps even mistreated you, but you are still my brother's widow, which means something in my world. It means you are entitled to protection, to security, to a place in this family, if you want it." "What would that look like?" Naomi asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "You would move into my home in Manhattan. You would take a position in one of our legitimate businesses. You would be seen at family events, at church on Sundays, at the social functions that maintain our standing in the community. You would be, to all outside appearances, a grieving widow, being cared for by her late husband's family. And in reality, you would be under my protection, under my authority. You would do as I say, go where I tell you, and trust that I know better than you do how to keep you safe in this world." The possessiveness in his tone was unmistakable, and something about it made Naomi's pulse quicken. This was not just about obligation or family duty. There was something personal in Alessandro's intensity, something that suggested his interest in her went beyond simple protection. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You barely know me. Michael and I have been married 3 years, and I can count on one hand the number of conversations you and I have had. Why do you care what happens to me?" Alessandro was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough. "Because my brother was a fool, and I am not." Before Naomi could ask what that meant, Alessandro continued. "The family is gathering at my mother's house. You should be there. You should be seen accepting our support, our sympathy. It will make things simpler going forward. And if I refuse? If I decide to take my chances on my own?" Alessandro stepped closer, close enough that Naomi had to tilt her head back even further to maintain eye contact. "Then, you will be making a mistake that I will not be able to protect you from. Choose wisely, Naomi." He held her gaze for another long moment, then turned and walked away, leaving Naomi standing alone beside the mausoleum, still holding his umbrella, her mind spinning with everything he had said. She looked back at the grave where Michael's casket now rested in the ground. She had loved him once, or thought she had. But Alessandro was right. They had not been happy together. Michael had been distant and secretive, his affections erratic and conditional. There had been nights when he had not come home at all, mornings when she had found lipstick on his collar that was not her shade. And now he was gone, and his brother, the dangerous, powerful man who ruled the family with an iron fist, was offering her protection in exchange for loyalty, for submission to his authority. It should have been an easy decision. She should walk away, leave New York, start over somewhere. The Caruso name meant nothing, and the Volkovs could not find her. But something stopped her. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the way Alessandro had looked at her, like she was something valuable and rare that he had no intention of letting slip through his fingers. Or maybe it was simply that Naomi was tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of feeling like she was always on the outside looking in. She made her decision. She would go to the reception. She would accept Alessandro's protection, and she would see where this dangerous path led, because the alternative was to spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, waiting for the Volkovs to come collecting on a debt that had never been hers to pay. The Caruso family home was in Brooklyn Heights, a massive brownstone that took up half a block and spoke of old money and older power. Naomi had been there only a handful of times during her marriage to Michael, always feeling like an outsider, always aware of the whispers that followed her through the elegant rooms. Today was no different, except that the whispers were louder, more pointed. She arrived in a car service, having sent her driver ahead after the burial, and found herself walking up the stone steps alone, her black dress still damp from the rain, her hair beginning to curl from the humidity. The door opened before she could knock, and a man in a dark suit who was clearly security nodded respectfully and stepped aside to let her enter. The gesture was simple, but it marked a change. Before, she had always been checked, questioned, made to wait while someone confirmed she was expected. Now, the security simply let her through, and Naomi realized that Alessandro must have given orders about her. The house was full of people, family and associates, all dressed in black, all speaking in hushed tones over glasses of wine and small plates of food that no one seemed to be eating. Naomi accepted a glass of water from a server and made her way through the crowd, feeling eyes following her progress. Michael's mother, Sophia Caruso, sat in the front parlor, surrounded by her daughters and their husbands. She was a small woman who had once been beautiful, but was now brittle with age and bitterness. Her dark eyes fixed on Naomi as she approached, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Naomi." Sophia's voice was cold. "How good of you to join us." "Naomi, I am sorry for your loss, Mrs. Caruso. Despite everything, I loved Michael." "Did you?" Sophia's tone suggested she doubted this. "You certainly had an odd way of showing it. Gallivanting around the city while my son worked himself to death trying to provide for you." The accusation was so baseless that Naomi almost laughed. Michael had not worked himself to death. He had gambled himself to death, made bad business decisions, borrowed money from dangerous people, but saying any of that would serve no purpose. So Naomi simply stood there, taking the abuse, waiting for it to pass. "That is enough, Mama." Alessandro's voice cut through the parlor like a blade. He stood in the doorway, still in his funeral suit, his presence commanding immediate silence. Every eye in the room turned to him, but his attention was fixed on his mother. "Naomi is family. She will be treated as such." Sophia's expression tightened with anger. She is not blood. She was Michael's mistake, a pretty face that turned his head and distracted him from his responsibilities. She is Michael's widow, Alessandro said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. And she is under my protection. Anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me. Is that understood? The room had gone absolutely silent. Naomi could feel the tension crackling through the air, could see the shock on the faces of Michael's sisters, the calculation in the eyes of the various family associates who had come to pay their respects. Sophia stared at her son for a long moment, then looked away first, which seemed to be a victory for Alessandro. She waved a dismissive hand. Do as you wish. You always do. Alessandro crossed the room to Naomi and took her elbow, his grip firm but not painful. Come with me. We need to talk. He guided her out of the parlor, through the crowded house, and up the stairs to what Naomi recognized as the family's private wing. They passed Michael's old bedroom, and Naomi felt a pang of something. Not quite. Grief, but something close to it. Whatever Michael had been, he had not deserved to die the way he had. Alessandro led her to a large office at the end of the hall and closed the door behind them. The room was masculine and intimidating, all dark wood and leather furniture, with windows that overlooked the street below. A massive desk dominated one end of the room, and bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked old and expensive. Sit. Alessandro gestured to one of the leather chairs facing the desk. Naomi sat, feeling very small in the large room. Alessandro did not sit behind the desk as she expected. Instead, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter and handed one to Naomi before taking the chair beside hers. You do not have to drink it if you do not want to, but I find it helps after family gatherings. Despite herself, Naomi smiled and took a sip. The whiskey burned going down, but the warmth that spread through her chest was oddly comforting. Thank you, she said quietly, for what you said downstairs. I meant it. Alessandro's eyes were serious. You are under my protection now, Naomi. That means something. It means no one touches you, no one threatens you, no one speaks to you with disrespect. Not my mother, not my sisters, not anyone. Why are you doing this? Naomi asked again. Please, Alessandro. I need to understand. You have made it clear that you intend to protect me, but I do not understand why. Is it just about Michael's debt? About family obligation? Alessandro was quiet for a long moment, studying his whiskey glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Michael was my brother, and despite his many failings, I loved him. But he was reckless, self-destructive, and he had a talent for hurting the people who cared about him. You deserved better than what he gave you. That still does not answer my question. Alessandro looked up, and the intensity in his gray-blue eyes made Naomi's breath catch. I saw you at the wedding. 3 years ago, when you married Michael, you wore white lace and carried yellow roses, and you smiled like you believed in fairy tales. And I thought my brother was the luckiest man alive and the biggest fool, because I knew he would not appreciate what he had. Naomi stared at Alessandro, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. Are you saying? She started, then stopped, not sure how to finish the question. I am saying that I have thought about you often over the past 3 years, more often than I should have, given that you were my brother's wife. I am saying that watching him neglect you, watching him take you for granted, was one of the hardest things I have ever done. And I am saying that now that Michael is gone, I have no intention of making the same mistakes he did. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Naomi's heart was pounding so hard she was certain Alessandro could hear it. Alessandro, She did not know what to say. This was too much, too complicated. Michael had been dead for less than a week. She should not be having this conversation, should not be feeling this complicated tangle of emotions that Alessandro's words provoked. I'm not asking for anything right now, Alessandro said, seeming to sense her distress. I am simply being honest with you. You need to understand the situation fully before you make your decision. What situation? Alessandro set down his whiskey glass and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes never leaving her face. If you agree to stay under my protection, you will move into my home. You will be seen with me, at family events, at business functions, at church. People will talk, because that is what people do. They will speculate about what our relationship is, what I expect from you, and what do you expect from me? Right now, loyalty, trust, the willingness to let me keep you safe. But eventually, Alessandro's gaze was steady, unflinching. Eventually, I expect everything. The words sent a shiver down Naomi's spine that was not entirely fear. Everything. He meant more than protection, more than safety. He meant himself, his life, his world. He meant a future that was unimaginable and terrifying and, somehow, tempting. "This is insane," Naomi said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Michael has not even been buried for 3 hours." "I know." Alessandro's jaw tightened. "And if I were a better man, I would give you time to grieve, time to heal, time to figure out what you want from your life. But I am not a better man. I am a man who takes what he wants and protects what is his. And I decided 3 years ago that you were mine, Naomi. I have just been waiting for the opportunity to prove it." The possessiveness in his voice should have angered her, should have made her stand up and walk out of this office, out of this house, out of this life. But instead, it made her feel something she had not felt in years. Wanted, desired, claimed in a way that Michael never had claimed her. "What if I say no? What if I tell you this is too much, too fast, too complicated? Then I will still protect you," Alessandro said simply. "I will still make certain the Volkovs do not come after you for Michael's debt. I will still provide for you, find you work, ensure you are safe. But I will do it from a distance, and I will spend every day regretting what might have been." Naomi looked at Alessandro, really looked at him, trying to see past the dangerous reputation and the cold authority to the man beneath. What she saw surprised her. There was loneliness there, and longing, and something that looked almost like vulnerability. "I need time," she heard herself say. "I need time to think, to process everything that has happened. Can you give me that?" Alessandro nodded slowly. "You can stay in the guest house on my property. It is private, secure, and will give you space to figure out what you want. But Naomi," he reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "Do not take too long. The world we live in does not wait for people to be ready." Naomi looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast of his pale skin against her darker brown, at the way his thumb was stroking gentle circles on the back of her hand. It was the first time a man had touched her with tenderness in longer than she could remember. "1 week," she said. "Give me 1 week to settle Michael's affairs, to say goodbye properly, to figure out if I can really do this." 1 week, Alessandro agreed. "Then you will come to me, and we will see where this path leads." He stood and pulled Naomi to her feet, but he did not release her hand. Instead, he lifted it to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture old-fashioned and courtly and completely devastating. Naomi felt heat spread through her body from that single point of contact, felt her resolve wavering like a candle flame in the wind. 1 week, she repeated, but her voice was barely a whisper. Alessandro smiled then, a real smile that transformed his harsh features into something almost beautiful. 1 week. Naomi Chen, make your choice wisely, because once you come to me, I will not let you go. The week that followed Michael's funeral was one of the strangest of Naomi's life. She stayed in the small apartment in Murray Hill that she had shared with Michael, packing up his belongings, sorting through the detritus of a life cut short. There was less there than she had expected. Michael had traveled light through life, leaving few traces of his existence beyond debts and broken promises. The Volkovs did not contact her, which Naomi took as a sign that Alessandro had been true to his word about protection. But she felt their presence nonetheless, a shadow at the edge of her awareness, a reminder that some debts did not die with the debtor. On the 3rd day after the funeral, Alessandro sent a car for her, not a request for her presence, but simply a black sedan that arrived at noon with a driver who handed Naomi a note written in decisive, masculine handwriting. "I thought you might need a distraction. Lunch at Romano's. Do not refuse me." Naomi should have refused him. She should have sent the driver back with a polite no, should have maintained her distance, her independence. But she found herself changing into a burgundy dress that she had not worn in years, applying makeup with more care than she had bothered with since Michael's death, and stepping into the back of the sedan. Romano's was in Little Italy, a family-owned restaurant that had been serving the same traditional dishes for 4 generations. It was the kind of place where Naomi stood out, where heads turned as the hostess led her through the dining room to a private table in the back. Alessandro was already there, dressed more casually than she had ever seen him, in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He stood when she approached, and Naomi noted the eyes following his movement, the subtle deference shown by the staff and other diners. This man was powerful, she realized, not just in his family, but in the broader community. People feared him, respected him, or both. "Thank you for coming," Alessandro said, pulling out her chair. "I was not certain you would." "I was not certain I would either," Naomi admitted, sitting down. "But I thought refusing would be rude after you sent the car." Alessandro smiled slightly as he took his own seat. "You could never be rude, Naomi. It is not in your nature. You do not know me well enough to make that assessment. I know more than you think," Alessandro signaled to a waiter, who appeared instantly with menus and wine. "For instance, I know that you worked 3 jobs to put yourself through Colombia. I know that your parents died in a car accident when you were 19, and that you have no siblings, no extended family. I know that. You met Michael at a charity gala where you were working coat check to make extra money, and that he pursued you for 6 months before you agreed to go out with him." Naomi stared at Alessandro, not sure whether to be flattered or disturbed by the extent of his knowledge. "How do you know all of that?" "I make it my business to know about the people in my life." Alessandro's expression was unapologetic. "When Michael told me he was marrying you, I looked into your background. I wanted to make certain you were not using him for money or status. And what did you find? That you were exactly what you appeared to be. A smart, ambitious, independent woman who worked hard and asked for nothing from anyone." Alessandro paused, his eyes serious. "I also found that you were far too good for my brother, but that was not information I could share at the time." The waiter returned with wine, and Alessandro ordered for both of them without asking, but somehow it did not feel controlling. It felt like care, like someone taking responsibility for making decisions, so she did not have to. "How are you holding up?" Alessandro asked, once they were alone again. "I am surviving," Naomi said, honestly. "It is strange, packing up Michael's things, sorting through what remains of a marriage that was dying long before he did. I keep expecting to feel more grief, but mostly what I feel is relief, and that makes me feel guilty." "Do not." Alessandro's voice was firm. "You are allowed to feel relieved that a difficult situation is over. That does not mean you did not care about Michael, or that you wanted him dead. It just means you are human." They talked through lunch, and Naomi was surprised by how easy the conversation was. Alessandro asked about her education, her interests, her dreams. He listened when she spoke, really listened, giving her his full attention in a way that Michael never had. And when he talked about himself, he was honest in a way that felt dangerous, sharing details about his life and work that she suspected few people were privy to. "The family business is changing," he said over coffee. "My father's generation believed in old ways, old methods, violence, and intimidation. But those tactics are inefficient in a modern world. I am working to move our interests into more legitimate enterprises. Real estate development, financial services, import-export without the questionable cargo. Is that even possible?" Naomi asked. "Can you really leave that world behind?" "Not entirely," Alessandro admitted. "There will always be elements of the family's past that linger, obligations that must be honored, relationships that must be maintained. But I believe we can build something better. Something that does not require looking over our shoulders constantly or worrying about which family members will end up in prison or dead." "Is that what happened to Michael? Did he refuse to change with you?" Alessandro's expression grew dark. Michael refused to take anything seriously. He thought the family name would protect him from consequences, that his debts and mistakes would always be cleaned up by someone else. He was wrong, and it cost him his life. "I am sorry," Naomi said, and meant it. Whatever Michael's failings, he had been Alessandro's brother. "So am I," Alessandro replied. "But I cannot change what happened. All I can do is make certain that his mistakes do not claim any more victims." The meaning was clear. Alessandro saw Naomi as one of those potential victims, someone who needed to be protected from the fallout of Michael's choices. After lunch, Alessandro drove Naomi back to her apartment himself, dismissing the driver and sliding behind the wheel of a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than Naomi had earned in the past 3 years combined. They drove in comfortable silence until they were stopped at a red light, and then Alessandro spoke. 4 more days, Naomi. You have 4 more days to make your decision." "What if I am not ready in 4 days?" Alessandro looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. "Then you will come anyway, and we will figure it out together." That sounds rather presumptuous. Perhaps. But I have found that certainty is more attractive than doubt. And I am certain about you, Naomi. About us. About what we could build together if you are brave enough to take the chance. Naomi wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the reasons this was a terrible idea. But the truth was, she was tired of being cautious. She had spent her whole life making safe choices, responsible decisions, and where had it gotten her? Widowed at 28, alone in a city that had never fully accepted her, carrying debts that were not her own. Maybe it was time to take a risk. Maybe it was time to say yes to something dangerous and uncertain and completely thrilling. "I will think about it," she said, which was not a no. Alessandro smiled, like he knew he had already won. "That is all I ask." On the 5th day, Naomi went to Michael's grave alone. The headstone had been installed, simple and elegant, marking the spot where he rested. She stood there for a long time, not praying, exactly, but trying to make peace with everything that had happened. "I am sorry I could not love you the way you needed," she said quietly. "I am sorry we could not make each other happy. But I am not sorry for the life I am about to choose, even if it means letting go of the life we had together." The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and Naomi took it as an answer, or at least as permission to move forward. On the 6th day, Alessandro called, not to pressure her but simply to check in, to hear her voice, to remind her that he was thinking about her. They talked for an hour about nothing important, and Naomi realized that she was smiling more than she had in months. On the 7th day, Naomi packed a bag. She did not pack everything, just the essentials. Clothes for a few weeks, her important documents, the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother. She left behind most of Michael's things, left behind the accumulated clutter of a failed marriage. At 9 in the morning, the same black sedan that had taken her to lunch arrived at her apartment. The driver loaded her bag into the trunk without comment, and Naomi took one last look at the building that had been her home for 3 years. Then she got into the car and did not look back. Alessandro's home was in Tribeca, a converted warehouse that had been transformed into a stunning modern residence. The building took up an entire corner, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of the Hudson River and the city skyline. It was both a home and a fortress, with security that was visible but not oppressive, a reminder that the man who lived here was someone important, someone powerful. The driver took Naomi's bag and led her through a private entrance to an elevator that required a key to operate. They rode up in silence, and Naomi's heart pounded harder with each floor they passed. The doors opened directly into Alessandro's penthouse, a vast open space with gleaming hardwood floors, modern furniture in blacks and grays, and art that was probably worth more than Naomi's entire education. But what caught her attention was the man standing in the middle of the room, watching the elevator doors with an expression that was equal parts triumph and relief. Alessandro crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms before she could speak. The embrace was tight, possessive, almost desperate, and Naomi found herself clinging to him, breathing in his scent, feeling his heart beat against her cheek. "You came," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I came," Naomi confirmed, pulling back just enough to look up at his face. "I am not saying this will work, or that I am ready for everything you want, but I am saying I am willing to try." Alessandro's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. "That is all I need. We will figure out the rest together." He released her reluctantly and took her hand, leading her deeper into the penthouse. "Let me show you your room. You can settle in, and then we will talk about what comes next." The guest suite was larger than Naomi's entire apartment had been, with a king-sized bed, a sitting area, and a bathroom that was pure luxury. But what caught her attention was the view. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the river, and Naomi could see boats moving through the water, could see the lights of New Jersey twinkling in the distance. "This is beautiful," she breathed. "I am glad you like it." Alessandro stood in the doorway, giving her space. "Take your time settling in. I have work to do this afternoon, but I will be home by 6. We can have dinner together, talk about the arrangements." "Arrangements?" "You will need a new job," Alessandro explained. "Something at one of our legitimate businesses. An office, role, perhaps, or something in event planning if that interests you. And we will need to be seen together, publicly. Dinners, charity events, family gatherings. People need to understand that you are under my protection, that you are important to me." "And am I?" Naomi asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Important to you?" Alessandro's eyes darkened. "You are the most important person in my life, Naomi." "I thought I made that clear." He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him, and Naomi was alone with her thoughts and her rapidly beating heart. The next few weeks established a routine that was both strange and surprisingly comfortable. Naomi started working at one of the Caruso family's event planning companies. using her organizational skills and attention to detail to coordinate high-end weddings and corporate functions. The work was engaging without being overwhelming, and her coworkers treated her with respect once they understood she was connected to Alessandro. In the evenings, she and Alessandro would have dinner together, either at the penthouse or at one of the family's restaurants. They talked about everything: books and politics and philosophy, discovering shared interests and debating their differences. Alessandro was intelligent and well-read, with a dry sense of humor that surprised Naomi and made her laugh more than she had in years. They were seen together at a charity gala, at a family christening, at church on Sunday mornings. And with each public appearance, Naomi felt the perception of her changing. She was no longer just Michael's widow, the outsider who had never quite belonged. She was becoming Alessandro's woman, though what that meant exactly remained undefined. Because despite the intensity of his declaration at the cemetery, despite the possessive way he looked at her and the protective way he touched her elbow or the small of her back in public, Alessandro had not pushed for anything physical. He had given her space, time, the freedom to adjust to her new life without pressure. It was Naomi who finally broke the unspoken boundary between them. It happened 6 weeks after she had moved into the penthouse. They had attended a benefit dinner at the Metropolitan Museum, an elegant affair where Alessandro had introduced Naomi to politicians and business leaders and family associates, his hand never leaving the small of her back, his attention never straying from her even when important people demanded his focus. When they returned to the penthouse, both slightly buzzed from champagne and the adrenaline of social performance, Naomi found herself following Alessandro to his study instead of retreating to her own room as she usually did. Alessandro poured them both whiskey, a ritual they had developed over the past weeks, and handed Naomi her glass. "You were brilliant tonight. Every person you spoke to was charmed. I learned from the best," Naomi replied, taking a sip. "You handle those situations like you were born to them." "I was." Alessandro's smile was wry. "From the time I was old enough to understand, my father was training me to take his place. How to read people, how to negotiate, how to make allies and eliminate enemies. It was not always a gentle education. Do you ever wish you could have chosen a different path?" Alessandro was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes, but this life is all I know. And there is satisfaction in doing it well, in protecting my family, and building something that will last beyond my lifetime." He moved to the window, looking out over the city, and Naomi found herself standing beside him, their reflections ghostly in the dark glass. "What about you?" Alessandro asked. "Do you ever wish you had made different choices?" "All the time," Naomi admitted. "I wish I had seen Michael more clearly before I married him. I wish I had been stronger, more independent. But I cannot change the past, only learn from it. And what have you learned? That safety is not the same as happiness. That sometimes the most dangerous choice is the one that leads somewhere worth going." She set down her whiskey glass and turned to face Alessandro fully. "And I have learned that you, Alessandro Caruso, are the most dangerous choice I have ever made." Alessandro's eyes darkened as he looked at her. "Dangerous how?" "Because you make me want things I should not want. Because you make me feel things I should not feel. Not so soon after Michael's death. Because every day I spend with you, I fall a little bit more under your spell, and I am terrified of what will happen when I stop fighting it." "Then stop fighting it," Alessandro said, his voice rough. "Stop running from what you know is inevitable. Stop pretending you do not feel this thing between us." He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones with a gentleness that belied his intensity. "I have been patient, Naomi. I have given you space and time, and every chance to walk away. But I am running out of patience. I am running out of the ability to be in the same room with you and not touch you, not claim you, not show you exactly how much I want you." Naomi's breath caught. "So show me." The words were barely out of her mouth before Alessandro kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss, not a tentative exploration. It was possession and promise, heat and hunger, everything that had been building between them for weeks exploding in a single devastating moment. Naomi kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, needing more. Alessandro's hands moved from her face to her hair, tangling in the thick curls, angling her head to deepen the kiss. She tasted whiskey and want on his tongue, felt the hard planes of his body pressed against hers, and thought that this was what she had been missing her entire life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alessandro rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me to stop. Tell me you are not ready, and I will walk away. I will give you more time. Do not stop, Naomi whispered. Do not walk away. I have had enough time. I want this. I want you. Alessandro's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, they were blazing with intensity. Say it again. I want you, Naomi repeated, stronger this time. I choose you, Alessandro. I choose this. Us. Whatever we are becoming. I am done being careful. Done being afraid. I want to see where this goes. Then come with me, Alessandro said, taking her hand and leading her out of the study, down the hallway to his bedroom. The room was masculine and beautiful. All dark wood and rich fabrics, with the same stunning views of the river. But Naomi barely noticed the decor because Alessandro was kissing her again, his hands everywhere, learning the shape of her through her dress, making her gasp and arch into his touch. They undressed each other with hands that trembled slightly, with kisses pressed to newly revealed skin, with murmured words in Italian that Naomi did not understand but felt in her bones. Alessandro was reverent and demanding, gentle and fierce, treating Naomi's body like something precious that he nonetheless intended to thoroughly possess. When he finally moved over her, braced on his forearms, his eyes locked on hers, he paused. I need you to understand something, Naomi. This is not casual for me. This is not just physical. When I claim you like this, I am claiming all of you. Your present, your future. Every part of you becomes mine. And what about you? Naomi asked, her hands sliding up his back, feeling the muscles tense under her touch. Do I get to claim you too? Alessandro's smile was fierce. You already have, Bella. From the moment I saw you walk down the aisle toward my brother, you have owned me completely. I have just been waiting for you to realize it. Then take me, Naomi breathed. Make me yours. Alessandro kissed her again, deep and consuming, and then finally, made them one. The sensation was overwhelming, perfect, like finding a piece of herself she had not known was missing. They moved together with an urgency that spoke of weeks of restraint, of desire too long denied, of two people who had been circling each other and had finally given themselves permission to collide. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Alessandro's bed, Naomi's head on his chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. The city lights glittered beyond the windows, and Naomi felt more at peace than she had in years. No regrets? Alessandro asked quietly. None, Naomi replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. This might be crazy. It might be too fast. But it feels right. You feel right. Alessandro pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You are mine now, Naomi Chen. For better or worse, you are mine. And I protect what is mine. I know, Naomi said, and that should probably terrify me. But it does not. It makes me feel safe. Good. Alessandro's arms tightened around her. Because I fully intend to keep you safe for the rest of your life. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Naomi dreamed of futures that had once seemed impossible but now felt inevitable. The next morning, Naomi woke to find Alessandro already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression that was soft and possessive and completely devastating. Good morning, she said, suddenly shy. Good morning, Bella. Alessandro leaned down to kiss her, slow and sweet. How do you feel? Happy, Naomi admitted. Nervous, overwhelmed, but mostly happy. Good. Alessandro's thumb stroked her cheekbone. Because we need to talk about what happens next. What do you mean? Alessandro sat up, and Naomi missed the warmth of his body immediately. Now that we are together, officially, there will be expectations. My family will expect a certain timeline, certain milestones. Naomi sat up as well, pulling the defined sheet around herself. What kind of expectations? Marriage, eventually. Alessandro's expression was serious. Children, to carry on the family name. A public commitment that makes it clear you are not just under my protection but part of the family permanently. Naomi's heart started to race. Alessandro, we have been together for less than 24 hours. You cannot possibly be talking about marriage already. I know it is fast, Alessandro said. But in my world, nothing is casual. Relationships either lead somewhere permanent or they end. And I have no intention of letting this end. So what are you saying? That I have to agree to marry you right now, or you will let the Volkovs come after me? Alessandro's expression hardened. That is not what I am saying at all. And you know it. I would protect you regardless of what you decide about us. But I am saying that if you stay with me, if you share my bed and my life, then eventually I will expect you to share my name as well. And what if I am not ready for that? Then we will take it one day at a time until you are ready." Alessandro reached out and took her hand. "I am not trying to pressure you, Naomi. I am just being honest about where I see this going. I want a future with you. I want you to be my wife, the mother of my children, my partner in building the kind of life and legacy that matters. But I understand that you need time to get there." Naomi let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Okay, I can work with that. As long as you understand that I need to figure out who I am outside of being someone's wife before I can think about being someone's wife again." "Fair enough." Alessandro pulled her close, and Naomi rested her head on his shoulder. "We will figure it out together." The weeks turned into months, and Naomi settled into her new life with surprising ease. She thrived in her job at the event planning company, eventually taking on more responsibility in managing high-profile clients. Alessandro was a demanding but supportive partner, encouraging her ambitions while also being clear about his expectations. They were together constantly, navigating the complicated dynamics of Alessandro's family and business empire. Naomi learned to read the subtle power plays at family dinners, to understand the unspoken hierarchies and alliances. She learned which associates were trustworthy and which were dangerous, which politicians were in the family's pocket and which ones needed to be handled carefully. And she learned that Alessandro was not just powerful but also principled in his own way. He kept his word, protected those under his care, and ran his business with a code of honor that might have been unconventional but was consistent. He was building something that would last, something his children and grandchildren could be proud of, and Naomi found herself wanting to be part of that vision. 6 months after their first night together, Alessandro proposed, not with a grand public gesture, but with a quiet moment on the terrace of his penthouse, overlooking the river as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. "I love you," he said simply, holding out a ring that was elegant and understated, a single diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build a family with you, a legacy with you. Will you marry me?" Naomi looked at the ring, at Alessandro's face, at the life they had built together over the past months. She thought about Michael, about the girl she had been when she married him, young and naive and believing in fairy tales. She thought about the woman she was now, stronger and wiser and clear-eyed about what love and partnership really meant. "Yes," she said, and watched Alessandro's face transform with joy. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, just like everything about them had fit from the start, even when it should not have worked, even when it was too fast and too complicated and too dangerous. They were married 3 months later in a ceremony at St. Anthony's Cathedral, the same church where they had buried Michael. Some people might have thought it was morbid, but to Naomi, it felt like coming full circle, like honoring the past while stepping boldly into the future. She wore white lace and carried yellow roses, just like she had at her first wedding, but everything else was different. This time, she walked down the aisle knowing exactly what she was choosing, knowing the man waiting for her at the altar was dangerous and complicated and utterly devoted to her. Alessandro watched her approach with an expression that took her breath away, pride and possession and love so intense it was almost frightening. When she reached him, he took her hand and held it throughout the ceremony, his grip firm and sure. "I take you, Naomi Chen, to be my wife," he said, when it was his turn to speak the vows. "I promise to protect you, to provide for you, to challenge you and support you. I promise to love you fiercely and without reservation for the rest of my life. You are mine, and I am yours, and nothing will ever come between us." Naomi's eyes filled with tears as she spoke her own vows. "I take you, Alessandro Caruso, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you, to trust in your strength while building my own. I promise to love you honestly and bravely, even when it is scary, even when it is hard. You chose me when I needed choosing, and I choose you right back, today and every day after." When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Alessandro kissed her like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. The congregation erupted in applause, and Naomi laughed against his lips, feeling lighter than air. At the reception, held at the Caruso family home in Brooklyn Heights, Naomi was surrounded by people who had once looked at her with suspicion but now treated her with respect. Alessandro's mother even embraced her, whispering, "Welcome to the family, daughter," with something that might have been genuine warmth. But the best moment came late in the evening, when Alessandro pulled Naomi away from the party to a quiet corner of the garden. The night was warm, and the sounds of celebration drifted through the open windows, but they were alone under the stars. Happy? Alessandro asked, his arms around her waist. Deliriously, Naomi replied, tilting her face up for a kiss. Thank you. For what? For waiting for me. For choosing me. For making me believe that happy endings are possible, even when they start in the most unlikely ways. Alessandro smiled and kissed her again, deep and slow. You are my happy ending, Bella. Everything before you was just preparation for this moment. They stood together in the garden, husband and wife, building a future on the ashes of the past, and Naomi knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Alessandro was dangerous and complicated and demanded everything from her, but he also gave everything in return. His protection, his loyalty, his love, his future, and that was worth more than any safe choice could ever be. 2 years later, Naomi stood in the nursery of their expanded penthouse, holding their 6-month-old son, Marco Alessandro Caruso, named after both his uncle and his father. The baby had Alessandro's dark hair and Naomi's warm brown skin, and he looked up at his mother with gray-blue eyes that were pure Caruso. Alessandro appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie after a long day of work. The sight of him still made Naomi's heart race, even after years together. How are my 2 favorite people? He asked, crossing to them and pressing a kiss to Naomi's temple before stroking his son's cheek. We are perfect, Naomi replied. Marco just woke from his nap, and I was about to feed him. I can do it, Alessandro offered, taking the baby with practiced ease. You should. Rest. Naomi watched her husband settle into the rocking chair with their son, watched him cradle the baby against his chest while preparing a bottle, and felt her heart expand with love so fierce it almost hurt. This was her life now. Dangerous still, yes, because the world Alessandro moved through would always carry risks, but also beautiful, filled with love and purpose and a sense of belonging that Naomi had never experienced before. She thought about the girl who had stood at Michael's grave 3 years ago, lost and alone and uncertain about the future. She thought about the choice she had made to trust Alessandro, to take the risk, to embrace something terrifying and wonderful. Best decision I ever made, she said quietly. Alessandro looked up from feeding Marco. What was? Saying yes to you. Choosing this life, this family. Alessandro's smile was soft and proud. I know. I am exceptionally worth it. Naomi laughed and crossed to them, perching on the arm of the rocking chair and putting her arm around Alessandro's shoulders. Yes, you are. Arrogant, but worth it. They sat together like that, the 3 of them. A family built from grief and danger and love fierce enough to overcome both. And Naomi knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever storms they would have to weather, they would face them together. Because she was Alessandro Caruso's wife, the mother of his children, his partner in every sense of the word, and he was hers, completely and utterly, just as he had promised that day at the cemetery when he had looked at her and decided she was worth fighting for. Some love stories start with chance meetings and first glances. Others start with tragedy and impossible choices. But the best ones, Naomi had learned, start when someone looks at you and says, "You are mine," and means it with every fiber of their being. Alessandro had claimed her at Michael's funeral, had seen her when she was most vulnerable and decided she was his to protect, his to cherish, his to love. And Naomi had chosen to be claimed, had taken the dangerous path, because it led to something real and lasting, and worth every risk. That was their story. Complicated and unconventional, and absolutely perfect for the 2 people living it. If this story of dangerous love, second chances, and finding home in the most unexpected place moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We share new stories every week about real people who discovered that sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most unlikely circumstances. What did you think of Naomi and Alessandro's story? Have you ever had to make an impossible choice that turned out to be the best decision of your life? Would you have accepted Alessandro's protection? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing how these stories resonate with your own experiences of love, courage, and taking chances on something extraordinary. Remember, sometimes the person who saves you is the one you least expect. Sometimes protection comes with a price, and sometimes the most dangerous choice is the one that leads to the greatest love. Thanks for listening, and we will see you in the next story.